Peace is a very important part of a peaceful world. I have been working on Middle Eastern peace ever since I've been the president.
We will now begin the signing of the Israel-Palestinian Interim Agreement.
Our objective must be clear and straightforward. It is not simply to end the state of war in the Middle East and replace it with a state of non-belligerency.
The United States will not and cannot run that risk to the American people. Leaving Saddam Hussein in possession of weapons of mass destruction for a few more months or years is not an option.
Creating peace in the Middle East, ending the endless wars, and bringing our troops the hell back home. It's time.
For decades, the US has never been far from events in the Middle East. Washington has been ally, broker, protector, invader. But America's influence in the region is waning, and others sense an opportunity.
In many ways, America's role in the region really began here, on board the USS Quincy in February 1945. US President Franklin Roosevelt and founder of the modern Saudi state, King Abdulaziz, held their first ever meeting. The Second World War was nearing its end, and America needed the kingdom's vast oil reserves to fuel its military and grow its economy, while Saudi Arabia needed US support and protection to build a new nation.
What is agreed between these two men on Bitter Lake in many ways defines the Middle East and our world as we know it today.
Over the next 70 years, the relationship between the two countries strengthens. Trade, investment, military and diplomatic ties deepen, but it's not without controversy. You can go all the way back to 1973 and Saudi leading an oil boycott of the US and other countries who supported Israel in the Arab-Israel war.
We believe that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center.
The terrorist attacks of September the 11th, 2001 also strained relations when it emerged that 15 of the 19 extremists who carried out the plan were from Saudi Arabia.
There would be enormous consequences if we start seeing movement on the chemical weapons front.
President Obama's decision in 2013 to not launch military action against Syrian President Bashar al-Assad when it was found that his regime had used chemical weapons against civilians was also a major turning point.
The region's special relationship seems to be unraveling. The US is now more focused on Asia, and successive administrations have paid less interest in the Middle East. Regional powers like Saudi Arabia are now preparing for a future when Washington is less dominant. So what is happening now?
First off, things have been frosty between President Biden and senior Saudi royals for some time. So when the kingdom took the decision to cut oil production earlier this year, at a time when energy prices were soaring globally because of the war in Ukraine, it caused anger in Washington, who felt that the move would boost Russia's finances. During his presidential campaign, Joe Biden vowed to treat Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, in his words, like a pariah over the murder of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. That did not go down well in Riyadh, especially after the uniquely close relationship that Biden's predecessor, Donald Trump, had with the young king-in-waiting. And there is a growing perception in Saudi and across the Gulf that America is no longer a reliable partner in the region. The chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021, the bloody and devastating legacy of the war in Iraq, and years of pursuing a nuclear deal with Iran, without much tangible success and despite the kingdom's concerns, have all fed into a deeper unease.
And that has led to Saudi Arabia taking decisions that has caught the US off guard. Most notably, an agreement earlier this year between Saudi Arabia and Iran to restore diplomatic ties after years of animosity. And who walked into that hole vacated by the US and brokered the deal? China.
The recent agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, brokered by China, took many, including the American government, by surprise. And it's a significant moment. Why? Because it may signal a shift in China's strategy from a primarily economic interest in the Middle East to a more diplomatic one. Beijing has already hosted Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, and now Israeli's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced that he has been invited on a state visit to Beijing, despite being shunned by his traditional ally in Washington.
But does this really mean that China is filling the void left by America?
If we look at America's military presence in the region compared to China's, it would seem there is still some way to go for Beijing to gain a security foothold.
Speak to many diplomats in this part of the world, and they'll tell you, maybe quietly for now, that they are planning for a future that is not dominated by America. In their opinion, the real power now lies in Beijing.
If any single issue visibly demonstrates America's waning influence in the region, then it's perhaps what is happening here. The situation between Israel and Palestine. For decades, America positioned itself as a broker between Israel and Palestine. It has hosted leaders, held summits, and vowed to find a peaceful solution to this long and bloody conflict.
But with the situation here at its most violent for almost 2 decades, and with no prospect of any peace process, America's approach seems, at best, outdated, at worst, entirely redundant.
In his most recent visit to Jerusalem, the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, vowed to re-establish diplomacy. The US government is pushing Israel hard in public and in private to lower the tensions, stop settlement expansion, and take steps towards peace. But Netanyahu's current coalition is the most right-wing and nationalist in the country's history, and many senior ministers simply do not want peace with the Palestinians. Even the recent signing of the Abraham Accords, an historic agreement between Israel and several Arab states, has failed to unlock its full potential because of frustration at the nature of the current situation. The US wanted to pivot away from the Middle East to focus instead on issues in the Indo-Pacific: China, Taiwan, North Korea. Washington has also been distracted by the war in Ukraine, but the Middle East has shown, once again, that it cannot be ignored, and the US is starting to pay the price for turning away.
But if President Biden can successfully negotiate a deal of normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and as part of that, revive the prospects of peace talks between the Israelis and the Palestinians, that will go a long way to re-establishing American influence in the Middle East. But for the first time, probably ever, the US is up against another superpower here: China.